What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So Jhin as a champion is a guy who's gone through one of the more interesting champion development experiences throughout the years. I mean, for starters, his actual design only took 7 months until his release on February 1st, 2016, once the project had finally been picked up by Riot Gypsy Lord. I mean, most champions take about 9 months, sometimes as much as 12, 14, even longer. But the reason why it was so quick was because Gypsy Lord actually started the design by picking up a concept that originally came from Kindred. When Kindred was being developed, she started with kind of like this bounty hunter passive sort of ability thing as a way to make an AD carry in the jungle work, and with that gameplay design the writers came up with 4 major character concepts to go with it. So one of those character concepts was the death concept, of course, of just like running around, reaping and collecting souls and stuff, and that was the design they actually went with for Kindred. But they also had a version of a concept that was like a dragon trainer, where you would kind of build up this dragon pet, and in the end you'd have like this super OP dragon bro at the end of the game. Another version was like a yordle on a mount, where you would be able to feed the mount and you'd make the mount grow bigger throughout the game, and that design actually might have inspired Kled a little bit. And the 4th option that they had, and that they also decided to scrap, was the cyborg cowboy bounty hunter known as Deadeye. And although Riot would go on to take that bounty hunter gameplay concept and the character and theme of the Death Reaper and make it into Kindred, that scrapped character concept of the cyborg cowboy bounty hunter was later picked up by Riot Gypsy Lord when he was assigned to make an AD carry. And so he took on the concept and decided that he really wanted to make a brand new sniper kind of guy. So yes, Jhin actually did start out as a design for Kindred. And it's from there where Jhin's development story begins. So join us today and taking a look back before his release to find out what Jhin could have been. And if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, definitely hit that dislike, because if this video hits, let's say 6K ratings, I'm gonna buy myself another pizza. So let's get started. So Jhin's character clearly came out of that Deadeye concept that originally started as Kindred, but when Riot Gypsy Lord took on the project of making an AD carry, he really did always have sort of like this longing desire to make a sniper type of character, but he did have a little bit of a problem, because Caitlyn already filled that role of being the sniper character in League of Legends by a pretty big amount. I mean, like, she's literally the sniper, like quite literally. So he had to find a way to make the gameplay of a sniper character fundamentally different to that of Caitlyn, but to still feel and play out like a sniper. You know, Caitlyn's just a sniper character because she has really long ranges on all of her abilities, especially her auto attacks as well. So he couldn't just give Jhin long ranges and call it a day, right? So he had to find a way to get that proper sniper feel without giving him super long ranges on everything. And so the alternative to that was something that Gypsy Lord got inspired by from the FPS genre of video games. So in FPS games, like Call of Duty and stuff, the thing about snipers that really sets them apart from having a long range is actually, if you think about it, it's really the power and like the actual intensity of their bullets, you know? Like, not only does a sniper have a longer range than like a pistol, but every single attack from the sniper is a lot slower. It's also ridiculously powerful compared to the pistol in the first place, or just like a machine gun or something else, where each hit is a lot faster, maybe a little bit more inaccurate, but also like kind of weak on the side. So that fantasy of making each shot individually like super powerful but also really slow was one that ended up, you know, satisfying that sniper fantasy actually quite well. Like, it gave off a pretty good sniper kind of feel. And so in order to accomplish that feel, he gave Jhin a limited number of shots that he could take before having to reload, as well as a fixed attack speed. And this is where his passive came from. And rather than just making each hit individually super powerful after playtesting a couple different versions, Gypsy Lord found out that it felt a lot more fun to make just the 4th hit extremely powerful compared to the first 3, and so it ended up as essentially like a 4-hit passive kind of thing. But the problem was that even though that 4-hit passive gameplay worked out so well, it honestly didn't exactly make that much sense thematically, right? As a cowboy bounty hunter kind of guy that Deadeye was. Like, you'd honestly have to be the worst sniper ever if you just purposefully had your first 3 shots suck. So in order to stick with that gameplay, they changed the character, and in order for the theme to make sense, they had to change his character to be sort of like a, you know, like a psychopath kind of guy. A guy who's just like obsessed with, he puts on a show and he saves the best shot for last because it's like the climax or like the finale of the play or something, you know, that kind of thing, right? So Deadeye was changed to Jhin, the Artisan Killer, spelled Jin, which was later changed to Jhin the Virtuoso, spelled Jhin, after he was finished being developed so that it wouldn't get confused with Jinx when typing it into the actual search bar. And this theme actually worked out great because all of a sudden now you had this character who was outrageously different from Caitlyn. Like, Jhin was so different from Caitlyn, it was honestly just crazy, but he still pulled off the feeling of a sniper in his own, convoluted sort of way. So all they really had to do was just flesh out the rest of his gameplay design. So from there they started with Jin's ultimate. He of course had a bunch of different versions with it, all of which kind of tried to pull off like the same thematic of like that, that theatrical performance kind of thing. We mentioned a couple in our Kindred video actually, since they were ultimates that were originally a part of Deadeye, but a lot of you might not have seen it, and it's so cool that it's definitely worth mentioning again. So the original ultimate for Deadeye was like this put your name on a bullet kind of ability that was inspired by a lot of iconic bounty hunter movies, and what it did was that it would ping certain targets on the map based on certain conditions, like I believe if they reached a certain level of HP, which was, I think, below 25%, it might have been 15%, I'm not entirely sure, or if they were targeted by, at the time, your bounty hunter passive effect kind of thing, because we have to remember Deadeye did have this bounty hunter ability, and so it would ping a target based on one of those conditions, and then you would get a chance to sort of like set up and then shoot a global missile at the target. So you channel for about 4 seconds while the character would build up his gun and set up like this huge epic blaster kind of thing, and then you would just attempt to shoot out this global skill shot that had a really extremely small hitbox on it. It was a skill shot kind of like a Lux ultimate, but with a much smaller hitbox, where there's just like a line indicator, and then bam, the whole thing just instantly hits. And so if you hit a target that was pinged by the ability, under the certain conditions, you set up your gun, you fired the global skill shot, you actually managed to land it, the target would literally just die instantly. Regardless of resistances, regardless of shields, regardless of anything at all really, except for like invulnerability spells like Kill Ultimate or something. They were just dead on the spot. And this version of the ultimate sounds really insane because it honestly kind of was, but it was actually scrapped because the main version that they playtested was just straight up too weak. They did test a lot of more overpowered versions, but they had to put a lot of handicaps on the ability to just make it fair to play with. So it ended up just being so unreliable that you would honestly just miss way too often, to the point where the ability kind of just sucked. Another version of his ultimate was that he would set up in the area that he was shooting, and then the Jhin player wouldn't be able to decide where the actual shots went. Instead, your allies would be able to see laser sights of where you were going to shoot, and so it was then up to your team to try and bait your opponents into actually getting hit by the ability. And so this version of the ultimate was pretty cool, but it ended up being actually really difficult to manage and felt way too complex. So it was changed into a version of his ultimate that kind of was a little bit like what he has now, but with more of a twist on it. So in that version of his ultimate, the first 3 bullets that he shot out wouldn't actually kill anyone. Like, it would just leave them at 1 HP, and instead, it would just cripple the fuck out of them. Like, it would be like an exhaust on steroids. They would get a huge slow, they'd take huge debuffs to their attack speed, as well as just their overall damage. It took a huge chunk out of their resistances, and was just annoying in general. And the 4th shot would actually kill targets finally, but the kicker is that if the 4th shot hit someone who was crippled, it would make them just explode into this huge massive area of effect radius of damage for just, a ton of damage that would just hit any opponents that were stuck in it. And this version was really crazy, but it was actually like ridiculously overpowered, because the thing is that if you hit anyone with the first 3 bullets of the ultimate, you actually kind of just straight up took them out of the fight entirely for about 6 seconds or so. I think that was the duration on it, 6 seconds. And personally, I'm kind of glad this one didn't make it, because that whole corpse explosion kind of thing is honestly just like, it's pretty gross. So eventually they settled upon the version of his ultimate that he has now, and it does work quite well with his passive and just like thematics and all that sorts of stuff. So next up came Jin's W, and along with his ultimate, they wanted another long-ranged ability to really promote that feel of, of like a sniper kind of character. Since his attacks were always short range, they came up with the idea of him being able to like attach parts to his gun to make it longer range, so he could have some attacks that were short ranged and some that were longer range to where it would still make sense. And so they implemented that in his ultimate and in his W, so he would normally be short range with his basic attacks, but to where it still made a lot of sense that he had a lot of long-ranged abilities in his W and ultimate. And so the original version of his W didn't actually have an indicator for his opponents, but it also had like a really long travel time, so it ended up just being like quite literally a Nidalee spear with twice the range on it that dealt physical damage. And that ability, it wasn't interesting, it wasn't really unique at all, so they just changed it to a similar version, more like what he has now. But the first version of that was actually really overpowered because originally it didn't require targets to be marked for Jhin to actually root them, right? So it ended up just being this crazy long range root ability that just made him ridiculous as a jungler, especially for ganking and all that sorts of stuff. So in order to make him a lot more fair, they developed like the marking kind of system so that he doesn't actually get to just root a target randomly at a crazy range. Someone on his team has to already have some kind of interaction with them. It also gave him this really cool feel of like having a spotter from your team where your teammate would just set you up and then you just snipe them down. And, it just generally made the ability a lot more balanced overall, and it worked out quite well. And so around this time was when they also made a fundamental change to his overall kit's design. So originally Jhin was actually manaless. He was, pretty much completely resourceless, like Garen almost. And it was a thing that Gypsy Lord really tried to push throughout his design as a way to, to make him unique to other AD carries. But what ended up happening is that it was it honestly kind of just made him broken as shit. From their playtesting with this manaless version of Jhin, they learned that a manaless AD carry actually kind of breaks a lot of the fundamental balance rules of bot lane. Since it's a 2v2 lane instead of a 1v1 lane, the attrition aspect becomes a lot more relevant. It becomes a lot less about how much damage you can deal and more about, how long can you deal damage for? How long can you take damage for? And stuff like that. And mana's a great way to give sort of like a cap towards like some goal for the end game of that idea of like how long you can deal damage for, and it gives you a lot of really interesting gameplay of, okay, I can trade here, I could go in and there, I could go out, I can do all sorts of stuff, but you're always thinking about like the end game of like, am I going to run out of mana? Are they going to run out of mana? All that stuff. And so eventually they were just forced to give Jhin mana. Otherwise he honestly would have just had the most insane laning phase of any AD carry, really. I mean, that's why there's never been a character that was intentionally designed to be an AD carry or a support that didn't have mana in the first place, right? I mean, there has been Kennen and Shen being played in the bot lane, but they were never designed to play in the bot lane, right? And so next up, they worked a bit on designing his Q, and Jin's Q actually went through quite a few versions in testing. Jin's design focus had always kind of been between like his long range abilities and his passive, right? Because those are what made him feel and play like a sniper, which is kind of the character that he was designed to be. So his Q was pretty much always more of just like this much more simple design of just like a targeted last hitting tool. So although it was kind of a boring ability pretty much always, it actually was good that it was kind of boring because the rest of his kit was already so complex, and it still did fix a lot of the problems in his kit, and that he really did actually need the help to last hit, especially when he was reloading as well. And one version of his Q was something that he would shoot into an opponent, and then the object that he shot into the opponent would get like stuck inside of them, and then he could target it and then shoot it outwards from you at a different angle as like a skill shot kind of thing. So this version was a little bit wacky, pretty complex, so they instead tried out a version of his Q that was a little bit simpler, that had more of like a spotted mechanic, like how his W kind of does now. And so that version of the Q would mark targets hit, and then the rest of his abilities would interact differently, maybe get some bonuses for hitting a marked target, stuff like that. But again, it was a little bit too complex. Like, they really just realized that his Q needs to be simple. It needs to be super simple. So they went for the bouncing grenade kind of spell. But in the first version of that form of his Q, the grenade could actually bounce infinitely as long as you actually had the targets to do so. And so the damage would also ramp up infinitely as well. So you could potentially pull off some really funny just area of effect damage plays that could potentially just like destroy an entire team if you had like the god scenario. Obviously that was a bit too crazy, so of course they settled with the maximum limit of 4 bounces, and they playtested some versions of that had some really weird targeting priorities, but eventually they figured it out and they settled upon the Q that he has now. And following that, they figured out his E. Now for his E, they wanted something that worked in a thematic sense by making him kind of like set up positioning, like a rooster nest kind of thing, right? Where he sets up this nest and then he snipes down some targets from it. And so it was always kind of like a strategic positioning ability with traps, but one version originally had Jhin use traps to tag enemies, which would then make all of his allies gain movement speed towards when they move towards those enemies, and 4 seconds after stepping on the trap, you would actually get hit by a huge armor shred effect, which overall it created a lot of positioning, a lot of strategic gameplay revolving around the ability, but it wasn't entirely what they wanted because it was more of like an aggressive or like a control oriented effect. They wanted something that had much more of like a defensive feel from this ability so that it could, feel like you're kind of setting up a nest sort of thing. So they instead decided to go with the crowd control intense effect and something that you could just set up around you to help protect your positioning when you ulted. They originally had a little bit more detailed graphics to go along with the animation, but they found that, like a blooming flower kind of effect was the more family-friendly approach to animating something that was really kind of just you brutally killing somebody. And from there, Jhin's design begins to wrap up. I honestly believe that he's really just like a masterpiece of a champion design in terms of making the thematics and the personality of the character really show in his actual gameplay. When you play Jhin, he really pulls off that vibe of like he's putting on a performance or he's putting on an act, and he also still really feels like a sniper without always being long ranged, and he certainly feels and especially plays a lot different to Caitlyn, that's for sure. And they even kept the original Deadeye concept as a skin for Jhin in High Noon Jhin. Jhin has probably one of the coolest personalities and themes of a character in League of Legends, and it's honestly just pulled off so damn well, and it just comes together so nicely, and he's got a great kit, and he really ended up just being an awesome champion. So although some of his previous designs were still super cool, I'm really happy with how he turned out overall, and Riot Gypsy Lord, man, you did an awesome job with him. So what do you guys think about Jhin's design? Definitely let us know in the comments below, and if you made it this far, thanks for watching all the way through. I really appreciate that. And I'll see you guys next time.